Hello everyone, it was round 2 of the Candidates 2020 tournament today, and my pick of the round was between the top highest rated player of the tournament, Fabio Caruana, versus the lowest rated player, Kirill Alekseenko. And in this game, Caruana was playing with the white pieces, Alekseenko was playing black, and Fabio decided to play d4, and after knight to f6, c4 e6, Fabiano played knight to c3, and after bishop b4 we're into a Nimzo-Indian variation, where black has now pinned this knight against the king. But now Caruana played a quite unusual move actually. He played this f3 system, which is quite a rare move actually. It's not the two most common anyway. The point of this move is that it prepares to play e4, support this e4 pawn, and gain some control in the centre if black ever plays d5 or c5. Now variations could continue here with black playing c5, but then white can play d5. And the variation can go like bishop takes c3, pawn takes, and then knight to h5 with ideas of queen h4 check coming in. This forces white to play g3 in this type of variation, and black can play f5, then there's e4 usually, followed by f4, knight to h3, and then e5. And this is all actually theory, it's all book, and after g takes f4, knight takes, queen h4, king d2 takes, and king c2. This is actually quite a typical variation, and you have to say it's quite interesting. Basically they're pinning their hopes on these two bishops to win in the endgame, but white also has a very solid structure in the centre thanks to this f3 move that we saw. However, instead of playing c5, Alekseenko decided to play d5 here, and Fabiano played a3, kicking the bishop. And now black's got to make a choice. They can retreat the bishop or take the knight on c3. If bishop takes c3, white will obviously recapture it, and black can play c5. I know it's quite messy in the centre of the board. The best move given is c takes d5, and then if knight takes d5, white can take the pawn at the expense of their pawn structure. Now black can play moves like queen a5 and try and hoover up some of these pawns, so the c3 pawn's attacked, c5 pawn is attacked, white can play e4, after knight to e7, bishop to e3, black can take on c3 with check, and white can play king f2, and again this is quite an equal position. Also after, let's say, bishop e3, black can just simply castle instead of taking this pawn. After queen b3, again we're into quite an even position, with black basically gambling on the fact that white's c pawns are doubled, and we'll probably try and pick up one of these pawns at a later date, for instance this pawn on c5. Alright, let's go back to the game. Alekseenko dropped his bishop back to e7, and finally Fabiano decided to play e4, get a pawn in the centre, why not? And now white's got a very solid structure, and again we see that this f3 pawn supports this pawn, so black took on e4, the pawn recaptures, and again black's got a choice to make, c5 or e5. If e5, then I think white can take with d takes c5 if they wanted to, and after takes, king takes, a trade of queens, knight g4, after king e1, black can take on e5, and again we've got equal pawns here, but white's got an isolated e-pawn. Does white really want this type of position? I'm not so sure. So maybe after e5 in this variation, white could play just simply d5. And I think this is better for white, because if bishop c5 now trying to gain some control over the dark squares, white can continue knight f3 attacking this pawn. If bishop g4, there's queen c2, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and knight b to d7. Again, white has a nice centre and maybe preparing moves like b4 coming in straight away. So you have to say white may be slightly better in this type of variation. But if we go back to the game, again black could have played e5, but black decided to play c5 in this game. And again I think if white takes this pawn off, I don't think it's very good for white, because then there's a trade of queens and white's pawns are somewhat quite clumsy. So Fabiano played d5. Black took, and then white recaptured, and I put this nice little arrow here, lovely arrow, because it just goes to show that this f2 pawn started from that position and now it's ended up on d5, and that's the whole point of this f3 move that Fabiano played. So white's now got a passed d pawn, and maybe you'd be able to use this to their advantage. Black castled here, Fabiano develops with bishop to e2, there was rook e8, again white developed, knight to f3, the standard moves bishop g4, castles, and black played knight b to d7, and so both sides are just developing their pieces. But now here's where the interesting variations start to arise. Caruana played d6, so the pawn supported by the queen, and it kicks this bishop off e7, it's forced to f8, and white now played h3, attacking the bishop on g4, giving black a choice to make. If black takes this knight off, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, I think white gets a good position because this bishop's just raking down the board. If knight e5, attacking this d6 pawn with the bishop and the queen, then white can play knight to b5, supporting the d6 pawn, preparing knight c7, and again this bishop could take on b7 at any moment. There's a variety of moves here, but I'll just go through a few. For instance, if a6, then I think white just wins with knight c7, forking the two rooks on a8 and e8, so we can't really do that. And knight takes f3 is also an option with check, but then after queen takes, again knight c7 is coming in and queen takes b7. If bishop takes d6, then white can just play rook d1, pinning the bishop against the queen. And of course there's no bishop h2 ideas because the queen supports the rook on d1. Lastly, there was knight takes c4 as an option, but then of course knight c7 once again. If knight takes d6, knight takes e8, queen takes and rook e1. So black's just given up the exchange for two pawns. Is it worth it? Maybe, but it seems that again as though white is better. They've got the open files for the rook and the queen. And I think white's just going to have an easy game of it. Just needs to develop this bishop to a good square. Sorry, maybe f4, maybe g5, not that one. Yeah, white should have a good game of it. So h3 by Caruana, and instead of taking off 3, bishop h5 was played by Alekseenko. And Caruana played knight to b5, so supporting the pawn on d6, preparing knight to c7. Again, if a6, then just knight c7, bishop takes d6, and queen takes d6. But then of course, black actually has an ace up the sleeve, rook takes e2. But again, black has to give up the exchange, knight takes a8, queen takes. And you've got to say again, white's just the exchange up, and probably should stand better in this position. I was looking at other moves like rook b8 here as well, but then just comes knight takes a7. If bishop takes d6, again the rook's tying up this bishop on e2, but still, queen takes d6 looks really good for white. Rook takes e2, maybe queen f4, attacking the rook, rook a8 and knight b5. But then black comes in with rook a6 and things start to get a bit juicy for black. After queen d3 and queen e7, you've got to argue maybe black's actually coming into the game here. So maybe if we just go back to this position, after knight b5, maybe Alekseenko should have played rook b8 and gone in for that variation. I think black will slowly get into the position, and it looks very nice. But in the game, black played rook to e6, eyeing up this d6 pawn, bishop f4 by Caruana to protect, and finally a6 by black, attacking this knight, kicking it. Fabiano jumps in knight c7, forking the two rooks. But black has rook e4, so attacks the bishop on f4. And now things start to get interesting, and white's got a few choices to make. Queen d2 was an option here, supporting the bishop on f4. I think this is white's best move. Black can take on f3, and if bishop takes, there's rook d4. But after queen e3, I don't think white's got any problems. After rook c8, to move the rook from the knight. Just rook a d1, I think white's absolutely fine. And if the bishop takes d6, just take twice. Rook takes, and queen takes c7. The point is after rook f d1, again black has just given up an exchange for a pawn. It's not worth it. I think white's got a very nice position here. So queen d2 was an option. Knight takes a8 was also an option, but after rook takes f4, it gets a bit interesting. Knight c7, knight to b6, attacking this pawn twice. If knight to d2, then there's a trade, bishop takes d6, rook takes f4, queen takes, and then knight d5, takes, queen d4 check, king h1, queen takes d5. Again, white's got an exchange up, but you have to say this isn't as easy as the previous positions. Black's got two pawns and a bishop for the rook, so it's very hard to decipher who's going to win the game. But the computers obviously give white an edge. However, if you were two human players, you would have to say this is not so easy. Alright, so rook e4 has just been played, but Caruana decided to play it simple. I think I like his next move, just bishop to h2, dropping the bishop back to a nice square. There's nothing wrong with this. And of course the knight on c7 is still attacking this rook, so rook c8 was played. And now Fabio's really annoyed by this bishop on h5. It's causing an annoying pin against the bishop on e2, as we can see. So he plays g4. attacking the bishop on h5. So there's a choice to make now. You can sacrifice on g4 or just put the bishop back to g6. If bishop g6 though, I don't think this is very good for black. After bishop d3 attacking the rook, there's literally only one space for the rook to go to, which is rook to e3. And then just bishop takes g6 is good for white, takes, and queen d2 attacking the rook again. Rook e4, rook ad1. If b5 for some counter-attacking, just takes twice, queen c2 attacking the rook, preparing g5 to hit this knight on f6, which is supporting the rook. Again, if rook e3, there's queen d2, rook e4, and then finally g5, knight to e8, and queen to d3, rook a4 and queen d5. And you've got to say, white's building up some momentum here. They're really squashing black's position, and it should be a matter of time before white makes this into some sort of material advantage. So going back, after bishop g6, bishop d3, black also has a choice to play knight b6 here, stacking the exchange again, with takes on e4, knight takes e4, and d7. After knight takes d7, knight d5. So black just sacrificed the exchange and won the pawn. Is it worth it? Again, I'm not so sure because white's got a very nice setup going on here. Yeah, you probably prefer to play white, so I don't think it's worth it. So maybe Alekseenko weighed up all his options and decided that it was just best to take the pawn on g4 rather than play bishop to g6, which is fair enough. So black wins 2 pawns to the piece straight away. Bishop takes g4, pawn takes g4. And again, black's got a choice to make. Do they take with the rook or do they take with the knight? Rook takes g4 looks very tempting with check and king h1, and maybe knight to e4, trying to mate the white king somehow. However, using stockfish, which I guess is cheating, but they recommended playing knight to d5, and if knight g3 check, take it twice, and play queen d3. The idea is just to use this queen to go to f5, to go to the h file to protect its king. For instance, knight to f6, rook ad1, knight to g4, and then just play queen f5. And after queen takes d6, white has a safe queen h5. After that, queen g6, queen h4, queen h6, takes. Again, white's just a whole piece up now. Well, for 3 pawns anyway, but you would say that white should be able to mop up this position. I'm not sure who you'd pick in this variation, but I'd certainly pick white to play. Going back though, black decided to take the pawn with the knight. Knight takes g4. Fabio played bishop to d3, attacking the rook. If rook to e3 here, then just bishop f4 would win the rook anyway. So after bishop d3, there was knight takes h2, taking the bishop. And we're into a very complex variation. So white shouldn't take the knight, because if knight takes h2, queen g5 is good for black. If king h1, there's rook h4. And preparing bishop takes d6, of course. So in this position, after knight takes h2, Caruana took the rook on e4, bishop takes e4, black took on f1, the queen took on f1, bishop takes d6, and knight to d5. And after the smoke is cleared in that complex position, white has emerged a whole knight up for 3 pawns. So you'd say on paper that looks quite even, however white's actually got a really nice position. The point is there's subtleties here, like for instance if black played knight to f6, white can take this, and if queen takes, they've got queen h3 at the end of it. A double attack against the rook and the pawn on h7. So for this reason, black's basically forced to play g6 in this variation, which is what happened in the game. Caruana played another nice move, just queen h3, threatening to play queen takes d7, followed by knight to f6. So king g7 is forced. So white's just made black play 2 forcing moves and just get us a nice position. Caruana played king h1, getting the king into some sort of safety in the corner of the board. And black played knight to e5. I think taking this knight is bad because knight takes, bishop takes. Suddenly it looks very difficult for white to win this game. They've got opposite coloured bishops, and again black's still got 3 pawns for the knight, so this would be not so easy. So after knight to e5, Caruana played the next logical move, which was knight to h4. Potentially going to try some knight to f5 ideas with the rook coming in to g1 at some point. Black played h5, maybe preparing to put their knight in to g4. Fabio played rook to g1, now preparing maybe knight to f5 with check and trying to win the bishop on d6. For this reason black puts it back to f8, But then knight to f4, and now white's threatening to play knight takes h5 with check because the g-pawn is pinned. So knight g4 is played, and Fabio was very crafty now. He played a sacrifice, knight takes h5 anyway with check. The pawn took, recaptured, and now bishop to f5, attacking the rook and the knight at the same time. So why has Caruana just given up a piece? Well, now he's attacking the rook and the knight, and he's going to probably take the knight with the bishop and then regain 2 pawns for his piece, with a substantial attack with the queen and rook as a battery. So bishop e7 was played, and we see Caruana crack open black's position now. Bishop takes g4, pawn takes, queen takes g4 with check. If this king moves anywhere, the queen's just going to mate it. So black's forced to block with bishop g5, and Caruana just played queen h5 here. The point is now the rook and the queen are just going to take it, so white's going to take on the next move with the rook instead of the queen. I mean, in this position, queen takes is possible with check, and after takes, king f6, knight to f3. Again, white is still winning, but yeah, queen h5 was just a better move because you can take the bishop with the rook next move. And here actually Alekseenko resigned the game. The point is after f6, then just knight to f5 ideas coming in, king f8, and it's forced mate actually with queen h8, king f7, queen h7, king f8, queen g7, king e8, and then rook to e1 at the end of it. Bishop e3 takes, queen e7, queen takes queen. Will be forced mate for white. So at the end, this was the end position, and I think Caruana played a really nice game against black here. It seemed like Caruana had it under control from the start. It's hard to really say where black went wrong. It looks as though Caruana prepared the f3 variation very well, and he ended up with a great position with the passed d pawn, which he used to his advantage in the middle game. So very nicely played. And I believe Caruana is now on 1.5 out of 2 in the candidates, so he's putting himself in a good position to try and win it and play Magnus in the World Championships. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my quick analysis of this game. If you noticed anything that I didn't, please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to read them. I'd love to reply to them all as well. And if you haven't already, please do recommend my channel or just subscribe and help the channel out. It's growing at a reasonable pace, so thank you for everyone who has watched the videos and subscribed. Anyway, hope to see you in the next video tomorrow, where I'll go through another candidates match game. See you next time.